it's good to see you. So today we'll be looking at chapter 15, proofing. Yes, chapter 15, proofing. And proofing is very important when it comes to document production. Okay. Again, in this chapter, we're going to be learning how to make use of how to use software tools to ensure that all work produced contain as few errors as possible. Verification, right? Yes, we'll also be looking at spell check. We'll be looking at verification, like I said. We'll be looking at validations, how to identify those errors in data entry, the consequence of the data entries, errors, most appropriate types of validation checks, how we can use the validation to restrict data entry. That is something we see more in chapter 20 spreadsheets, although you can also see that in chapter 18 database as well. Okay, we explain why proofreading and other forms of proofing are needed. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little bit of a summary on this topic. Okay, let's start with the software tools. Okay, right now most of you are acquainted with software tools, talking about the Microsoft Office. Okay, which we use to check document for spelling and grammar errors. We're talking about the Microsoft Word. Okay, yes. So any word or phrase that is found on it, that is not found in the dictionary, it flags it as an error. But hope you know that there are some words that are not in the dictionary that are also correct. Because again, when we look at the Microsoft Office, it is US dictionary, not the UK dictionary. So you need to also know that. Although you can also add the UK dictionary to it. Okay, so it can actually see those times. So anytime an error is flagged, okay, you have to read it carefully and decide whether to change it or to ignore. We'll be doing that a lot in document production, where we have to look at some words and we have to know if we're going to change it or we're going to ignore. Now, key points to this discussion before we proceed is the fact that in document production, we're only looking for the spelling errors, right? Errors that are, you look at the spelling and you could tell from a glance that this spelling is not it. This is wrong. It's wrong in every form and it has to be corrected. So yes, spell check. Okay. So we need to make sure that the work is spelled correctly. Very important, right? It's spelled correctly and contains no data errors. Okay. Or what we call typos, typographical errors. Okay. Again, now this mistakes when we are typing in. So you could have something like this, right? This is a good example of what we're talking about. So we have this spelling. You could tell that is wrong, right? Because it's showing this red line because it does not recognize this in the dictionary. And again, this is a typo. Okay, so it simply means that we need to change this. Okay, so errors may already exist in document you're working on. Okay, and we'll see that when we're talking about verification. Okay, so sometimes the source document could actually be wrong. Okay, I was having a class 2 days ago teaching the A-level students who are paying for the IT, information technology, and we talked about this. Very important, we talked about this. Okay, we talked about this in a case where you could actually see that. In fact, one of the questions, one of the past papers that we looked at was October, November 2023. I think I have that video on my YouTube channel. And yes, we looked at the idea of why we need to talk about why verification and validation is needed. Okay, and here we saw the source document and then we saw the database file. Okay, so it is very important for you to know that even the source document might also contain some errors. So it is not out of place that it's not only when you're working that you have errors, even the source document can contain errors. So this is very, very important. Okay, so yes, the next thing we're going to look at is, so the errors need to be corrected. So that's important. What is spell check? What is spell check? So again, spell check is a test carried out by the software, which is in this case, the Microsoft Word, or what you call the word processor. Okay, the word processor. Now, going back to chapter 1, okay, types and components of the computer system, we looked at application software, right, which provides the user to perform a specific task. And we look at examples of application software, right? And the first thing we looked at is, right, the word processing packages or software, whichever you want to call it, right? And a good example of it is a Microsoft. So we don't just call it the Microsoft Word, but rather because we have other softwares that are word processor. So this is a test that is carried out by the software, often a word processor on the text. Okay. So as you work, it is expedient that you check each word and you compare it with the one held in dictionary. Again, I want to repeat, I want to iterate the fact that yes, it might not be in the dictionary, does not mean it is wrong. What we are invariably, the typos that we are correcting is the spellings. Not, yes, we have to go to the grammatical to check the ones that are really obvious. We have to look at coincides. We have to look at portraiture conventions and all the rest. We're going to look at what, right? But more or less, when each time I'm teaching about proofing, I always refer to your English language because the English language is very, very core, right? Because there are certain words that you know is wrong, and this is where your English language is going to play a major part here. Okay, so if the word does not match one in the dictionary, then it uses a red wavy underline, something like this, right? A red wavy underline. If it does not match, if it's not in the dictionary to recognize it, it's going to use a red wavy underline to highlight the word and probably to suggest that it may be an error. Again, yes, we see this, right? And I'll just open my word and type in some names that I've not really added to my dictionary, right? There's some words, there's some names I've added to my dictionary already. Let me see. So let's look at this. Um, okay, good, right? So it's showing that red wavy line, right? That red wavy line. Now it simply means that this is not recognized by the dictionary. And what you have to do, most time you have to do this when you click on it, and you have to right click, and then what happens? You see where you say add to dictionary. It's going to give you some suggestions. Okay, do you want to add this to dictionary? So whenever you type in the name, it doesn't show you that red wavy line. Okay, so this is more or less like a spelling, like it's an error because we cannot recognize this particular name in the dictionary. Okay, most time you just have to ignore. Okay, you can just ignore, but other times we have to type in the name, it will have to show you until you add it to the dictionary for a dictionary to be able to properly say it. So this is very, very important. So it suggests it may be an error. It does not tell you that it's an error outright, but it's giving you a suggestion. Are you talking about this? It tries to look for things that are common on the dictionary. Are you talking about this? Do you mean this? Do you mean that? And you might have the option of just adding or ignoring. Okay, so this is very vital. The next one is, what does the spell check always work? So if the word processor shows the red wavy underline, it may be a spelling error. We talked about that. Also, again, the red line tells you that the word um, has compared this word to its dictionary and not found a match. So this is what we are saying. It's checked from dictionary and it does not find a match. Again, like I said, not all computers have the same dictionary in them. Okay, for example, you're using a UK um, literary terms on a US dictionary, you're going to find some errors in between. Okay, so again, the dictionary will depend on the regional setting used. You can change it to UK, you can also change it to US, whichever one you want to work with when setting up your computers. Okay, so this is very, very important. Sometimes, as the case above, it is a spelling error, right? Which is what we'll be dealing with in document production, spelling errors that we have to change. And some other times, like Tabara, right? I flagged as a spelling error because dictionary does not contain the name, right? Tabara, right here, doesn't contain the name. So when a person's name is entered, it will most time person's name, um, okay, and some other organizational names that is not being recognized by dictionary does not mean that it is wrong. So you need to know that, okay? So some names will be shown as error and others names were not, okay? Suggested spellings. So we have them here. So when what shows you a suggested error, what do you do? You can right the mouse over it and drop down for suggested word like this. We've talked about it. I think I showed you for 2EJ, right? When I right clicked and it was telling me, do you mean um I can't even pronounce these names, right? I'm like, okay, read aloud. You can also read aloud. That's the beauty of 360 to see, okay, how does it sound? Okay, you could add to auto, you can change all, right? Or you could just add, you could do see more, right? You could see more to it and it's going to show you how this is, just to give you an idea of that word. Okay, so this is very, very important. Okay, so other errors, okay, maybe flag and spelling errors like this. Does not start with, okay, does not start with. See that? Does not start with. Now, this red wavy underline does not mean that, it simply means that is a repeated word, right? Which needs what? Removing. So deleting this extra word is going to solve the issue. When you have the same word, you're having a repetition of the word. In this case, does not, that's an error, right? Because again, why this word is recognized in the dictionary, but this is just a repeated word. Okay, and then it needs to be removed. Grammar check. Most time we will be dealing with grammar check. Okay, few times. Okay, most of the grammar check that we look at is usually the one that you have to do, put a comma in between and stuff like that. But majorly it's spelling checks that we do most of the time. But let's look at grammar check is also important. Okay, so a grammar check will suggest the text against a number of grammatical rules. Okay, that would help you improve the language structure. This is like an English class. Okay, that's one thing about ICT. Course across everything. So most of you know these things already, but for the purpose of recording, we have to talk about them. Okay, so it helps you to improve the language structure of your word. Okay, now for example, you're having this is a sentence, comma, this is another. Okay, so you would not need to correct grammatical errors shown in text provided for you in the source file. A grammatical error is shown with a blue wavy underline like this. So when it's an actual error, it shows with a red wavy underline. When it's a grammatical error, it shows you with the blue wavy underline. Okay, so in this case, the error is missing what? A full stop. Because obviously when you see something like, you see the first one is a capital letter, then you need to know that it's missing a what? A full stop. So a comma has been used instead at the end of the word sentence. So this is a sentence. This should be a full stop. Okay, and because you can't have a comma and then you have an uppercase, so you have to put in a full stop, right? And then you can have this another. So this is a grammatical check. This helps you to check to say, okay, no, this should be this, okay, in all retrospects. Okay, so it's important. So the word processor will recognize that there's an error, although it will suggest the changing on the line to this with the lower text. Okay, so in this case, if we're typing it, let's see what we're talking about. Let's do it practical. So this is a sentence. Okay, this is another. Okay, let's stop here and let's see what happens. Showing me that, right? So this is, you can see this, right? Now, if I right click on it, it's going to tell me double check capitalization here. It should be this. Okay, and then we want to see why this is, right? And most time you can read aloud and you can do that, right? So option for grammatical, right? You can check for option for grammatical, and you could also add in some things as well. So most time when it sees this, it tells you that it should be this. It shouldn't be this other way around. So if I do this now, the blue wavy underline is gone. See that it's gone. Okay, so this is very, very important. Okay, the next one we'll look at is validation routines. We've probably touched on this. We've talked about validation routines. Okay, this is chapter 7 all over again, right? Under the systems life cycle, under the design phase. But the whole idea of validation is to ensure that the data is reasonable. Okay, so it's often a process where data is checked to see that it satisfies what a certain. This is like copy and paste from chapter 7, right? Satisfy certain criteria when we impute into a computer. Again, it does not check. I want to check the fact that validation does not check that the data entered is correct. Please take note. But it checks to ensure data entered is what? Reasonable, it's sensible, right? It simply means that it satisfies those criteria that have been imputed into it. Appropriate type of validations. How do you know the appropriate type for validation? So again, it's important to apply this, especially in database and spreadsheet. Okay, this is for database and spreadsheet, but because of document production, we might just have to just glance through, so that when it's time for database, it's time for spreadsheet, you can always come back to this particular video and then you can listen to it again. Okay, so it's important to know the type of additions you're going to apply. Now, for example, I have You would not use a type check on the book title, as book title contains any type of what character, right? So in fact, you will likely find a validation check for any type of this check, or to check this type of what data. So you could find any. So using a type check for a book title is fine, but there are other things you could actually use for it. Okay. Again, a length check will not pick up a transpose digits in an ISBN. We've talked about ISBN in chapter 7, right? The whole idea is, of course, we already know what that's the international standard book, whatever, right? Okay, but we know already that if we're talking about those transpose digits, checking if the data the digits are not missing, are not being transposed, talking about, do we have, instead of 5 or 1 2 3 4 5, we're not having probably 5 4 3 2 1, okay, etc etc. Okay, so a length check would not, okay, would not pick up a transpose, but could be as well used as what, a check digit for what, double checking. That's why we use ISBN as check digit, to actually check that the numbers are actually correct, because again, these are books number, right? Each number represents a book, so we could have 7 6 5, the last three digits representing each book, especially from the same manufacturer. So this is very, very important. So here we have this, right? So here we have validation check, we have appropriate, we have selected. So of course we'll talk about range check. What we'll talk about range check, we're talking about the ones that lie between the upper bound and lower. It checks to see within a range, within what, lowest and highest, right? From lowest to the highest, right? So again, you want to do appropriate, yes, select integer from this simply means greater than 0, right? And less than 13. So here, right, now most of you have seen where that question came from in your original assignment. Okay, so here you're having 1, and then you're having 12. Okay, so here you're having between 1 to 12. So yes, a range check, yes. Selected, yes. The next one is length check. And what is done, is it appropriate? Let's look at it. Is it appropriate? So we said yes, restrict 2 characters, but would not stop 13, 14, etc, right, etc etc. So is this correct for the length check? So the length check is just to restrict to 2 characters, but would not stop 13 and 14. Is this correct? Yes, it is, because again, what the length check is checking is, what the length check is doing here is to check that there are only 2 characters. In this case, it can be what, 2 numbers. Okay, 2 numbers that are entered into what, that particular what, field. Okay, that entered into that particular field. So whether it is 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, it's not going to stop it. The only time you have an error is when you have more than 2 characters. Hope that makes sense. When you have more than what, 2 characters. Okay, the next one is character check. Okay, is it appropriate? No, right? And for database, we restrict to numbers if numeric data is what, selected. So again, for database, we restrict it to what, to numbers. Okay, so if numeric data is selected. Now for spreadsheet, it would need to check that it is what, it need to check what, numeric, not what, text. And of course, would not restrict to correct value. So it's only checking, is it a character or is it numeric? So again, for a spreadsheet, that would be fantastic, but for a database, it would not be. Because again, you'll not be able to probably check if what the user is putting is this or that, right? So it's very, very important. Again, the character check is just checking to ensure that the data entered, is it numeric or character? Okay, format check, no, because it doesn't have anything to do with a format. Okay, so we have limit check. We don't have the CSV file for us to properly check, so we're just explaining the whole concept. Again, for format, is only checking for date. Do you understand? We're just checking for date, which is in the format of DDMMYY, right? Limit check is only going to what? Would only restrict one end of the range. Okay, limit one end. Of course, limit check. We didn't talk about limit check in chapter 7 because it's not there, but we're bringing it here. So we're just adding other checks to it. Okay, so it's going to restrict one end of the range. Present check will be appropriate, but would only check something had been entered. The whole idea for present check is to ensure that that field is not empty. Okay, so if you're going to bypass that field, it tells you no, you have to what, type in something into that what field. That is very, very important. Consistency check, right? Of course, for consistency check, it's a single field with no other related what field, so it's not good. With that CXV, I wouldn't know. I've not seen the CXV yet, but again, consistency check to ensure that every data that has been entered into that field is consistent. I will not having something that's out of place. Of course, for check digit, we have it as ISB N. Okay, so that is very, very important. So let's talk about validation in Access, which is the recommended software for your databases. Okay. We don't have the CSV here to work with, so we're just going to explain the concept. Okay, so of course you have to create a new database, and of course in a design, we call this the design view. Okay, we call this design views, and of course in the month field, this is the month field, right? The month here. Okay, right here, this is the general. We call this the field properties. Okay, we call this field properties of each of the data type. Okay, what we do now is we're going to move to what we call the validation rule. And this simply means that in the month, we should not have anything less than 1. We should not have anything. We should have from 1 to 12, which is January to December. Okay, so anybody putting anything, and the whole idea for the validation text here is suitable text that tells the user that they have made a data entry error, and give them the information as to what is acceptable for that field. So again, they will tell you invalid data, or you've imputed an invalid data, or there's an error. Please choose a number between 1 to 12 and 12, right? Okay, so this is very, very important. Okay, the whole idea here is going to limit, okay, certain options for the user. Okay, so please let's take note of that. The next one is the title. And now for the title, again, we go to the validation rule. Okay, so you have in your validation rule here. Okay, so this we can restrict it in such a way that we have data entry to only Mr. and then there's a comma. Now we're putting them in quotes, just a single speech mark, right? We have Mr., Mrs., Miss, or Doctor. Okay, and then we can add an appropriate text. We call it a validation text to say, okay, invalid entry only, this is what allowed, and then you can now choose. So this is very, very important. So open the table and add a new record in the database and try entering this date and to see what happens. Okay, so again, you're going to have an error here. You're going to have error. You're going to have an error there because it's not the validation rule that has been set. There is no MS in the validation rule that has been set, right? Again, let's look at validation in Excel. How do we do validation in Excel, which is what we are also doing this term. So validation in Excel, what we are doing is we're going to data validations, and we'll see this we'll see it in data. Data validation should be somewhere here. Yes, right here. So under the data section, data tools, you're going to see data validation here. So the whole idea here is the fact that we're using data validations to ensure that we are only restricting it, okay, to a certain options that we want to give also this. Now, let's say we want to do the same thing that we did in database in spreadsheet. Again, so we're highlighting cell C2 to C26. Okay, so under the data tab, okay, then in the data 2 section, okay, then you select your data validation icon. This is the icon here. So if you're not having this, okay, if you're not having this, probably you'll be having something like this right here. Okay, so whichever one you have it. So take note of that. Okay. So this opens something like this. It's going to open something like this. Okay, and then you can click on settings. You go to settings here, and then you can now choose this whole numbers. We're choosing whole numbers. And what happens when we choose whole numbers is going to make sure that only integers can be entered into the cell. Okay, only integers can be entered into what? This cell. Okay, so once we do that, the next thing is this, the data. What are we doing? Now look at this. They said greater than 0 and less than what? 13. So what we are doing here, we're not using what? Between. We're going to use what? Between, right? And between talks about the smallest and what? The largest values. So here we're now having 1 and 12. Okay, and then we can click on our OK. Now what happens is after we've done this, we have to move to error alert. Error alert. The whole idea of error alert is if a user enters more than 12, what happens? It should show an error that you have entered what? An invalid data. So here I can put what? Wrong data entered. Okay, and then I can now what? Type in my what? Error message, which is what the user is going to what? See. Okay, so this is, you can tell you, please choose a number between 1 and 12. Is this steps is just the way it is. It's not really complex because we will be doing papers that has to do with that. Okay. The next one is for the other one. For the other one that we talked about for title, it is seen as a list. Okay, it is seen as a list. So we're going to type in the list. Now we're not putting any speech marks. We just put in the name, Mr., Mrs., Miss, and then Doctor. And then we can ignore blank, check on ignore blank, check on what? Insert drop down. Okay, so this is very important. It's different from this other one here. Okay, because here we're just ignoring the blank. But here we're just making this what? We can ignore the drop down. So you can decide to what? Do an insert drop down in such a way that when they click on it, it has the drop down and go on it. Now let me show you what I'm talking about. I know it's not what we should be doing, but again, it's just to show you what I'm talking about. So here we have a list, and then at default this is ticked. So you have an insert drop down. This insert drop down talks about the fact that there's going to be a drop down icon. If I uncheck this, I don't have a drop down icon. Okay. So here I have, let's say I have Mr. I have Miss, I have Doctor, right? I have Doctor. All right, so let's do this. And error message could be invalid data, right? Invalid list. Let's just put invalid data. Here we can have select from the list of options. Okay. So if I click on, of course, I did not even select the cell I'm going to apply to, but it's probably going to show here, which is D5. See, this is what is selected on. So if I do this, what I have is what? I have this. See that, right? Now, what happens if I do master? I type in master. What happens? Invalid data. Select from the list of what? Options. So I have to properly select from what I have here. But in database, it's different because you need to have what? That validation what? Rule. Okay. Proofing technique. Okay. There are no validation checks that we have studied, that we've looked at in this video here. The term proofing in printing simply means to make sure that the work is accurate. That's what proofing is. In project work, they proof your work. Okay, and we also have proofread. We have proofing, we have proofread. Okay, so in proofing, when we talk about proofing in printing, is to ensure that the work is accurate before you actually print, send your work to what? The printer. Okay, so it includes checking not only spelling, but we'll look at punctuation conversion. We'll also look at the grammar word check. Also page layout. May I say that this proofing technique does not only cover document production, but covers presentation, database, even your spreadsheets. Because you have to look at the page layout, ensuring that the right page is what is printed. So the correct application of styles. So this includes the following. Number one, the correct application of styles. Are you applying the right style? We've talked about styles in our previous video. Okay, we looked at chapter 14. Are you applying it? Is the styles that have been specified in the question, is that what has been applied? We look at the correct margin settings. They said 2 centimeters, top, bottom, left, right. Is that what has been applied? So all this is very, very important. He said the image placed as what? At the specific paragraph. Is the image placed at the specific paragraph? All these are proofing techniques. Text wrap. They said text wrap the image, wrap the image, wrap the text around the image. Is it properly done? Is it done? So people just go, but sir, my work is okay. Mr. Joe, I've gone through. Proofing technique. Proofing technique. Go back. Go to your work. Because when it comes to document production, every mark matters. You have to ensure your work is thorough. You have to ensure your work is thorough. Okay? Image not distorted. It is very important. Your images is very important. You don't just insert any image and then you start to, let me see if I have any, can I get one online? Let me just get an online image of maybe a mountain or something. Let me get mountain. Okay, let me get fountain. Okay, fountain. Okay, this seems good. Okay, just insert this. All right, downloading. So we have this, right? So again, it's important not to ensure your work is. Most people do this. Oh God, I've seen a lot when marking, and you go ahead and do this. I'm like, what's this? So go ahead and I don't know how you. So go ahead and do this, and you just and you do this. I'm like, it's the work. It's not the work. It's not. It's distorted. And this is why it is important, just going to do the work, to always maintain aspect ratio. And how do you maintain aspect ratio? You have your picture format here, and then right here, you have your shape width, and you have your shape height. So it simply means that if I reduce it like this, what happens? Guess what is happening? The height is also being reduced as well. This is by maintaining aspect ratio. So it's not something you just manipulate. Don't manipulate your images. Please do not manipulate your images. This is very important. Object fitting within the boundary of a page. Is it fitting within the boundary of a page, right? Or column? And this is why it is important to always use what? Your grid lines to ensure that this particular image, although we have not done wrap text too, is it fitting across the column? You have to check to ensure that if this was the column, which is 7, that you don't have the image outside the column. So if I have it outside, what do I have to do? I have to properly adjust it. So now I have it within the column. So this is very, very important. Very important. Okay. Objects not overlapping. So please, they won't even specify in the question. It shouldn't even overlap. It shouldn't overlap any item. What do I mean by overlap? Overlap in such a way that let's do in front of text. So we have this. This is overlapping. Now you're covering the text. And we say, Jerry, the work is fine now. It's not. It's not. It's horrible. Okay, forgive me for my choice of language, but it's not. It's overlapping, and you have to ensure it does not overlap. When we talked about presentation, we talked about this to ensure that your work is not what overlapping. So this is very, very important. Okay, this is very, very important. All right. Again, no list split over 2 columns or pages. Please, your list must not split. What do I mean? You should not have a list like, for example, I have names, top 5 footballing club, right? I'm a football fan, so yeah, footballing club. Yes. So the first club, let's put it in the list, right? So it could be a bulleted list. So we have this. We have um, Manchester City, and maybe Liverpool, and then we have Real Madrid. Okay. maybe we have Paris, Saint Germain. Okay, and I think is it 5? Maybe we can add I don't know, maybe we can add yes, Inter Milan. Okay, so we have this, right? Top 5. So we have this. So please, it should not be in the case where probably if this was a column break, right? We have maybe 3 here and 2 here. That would be terrible. Okay, I want to paint a good picture. Probably I can just do something like this and just to explain. So we have something like this. No, it should not be. Your list should not split. You're going to lose marks. It shouldn't split. So this is very, very important. I'm going to undo the work. So it should not split. Okay, no tables should split over 2 columns. If you're creating a table, it should not split. Still the same thing. These are all proofing technique, and this is what you will see in document production. Proofing technique. And most of the time, I will be referring you guys to that, right? You had an error. What was the error? Proofing technique. And I'm not expecting most of you to ask me, so what's proofing technique? Because we've talked about proofing technique. So I'm expecting for you to go back, look at these proofing techniques, and then check your work to say, okay, what have I done wrong? Is this the thing that have been specified? Am I doing them or am I not doing them? No blank columns on blank pages. Please, you have to check. There are no blank pages. Even presentations, no blank slides. Okay? No windows or offense. And that's the next thing we are moving to. No windows or offense. Mr. Ajiro, what's a window? Mr. Ajiro, what's an offense? And I want to talk about that because this is very important. Part of proofreading and error correction will be to check for windows and offense. So what's a window? A window is the last line of a paragraph. I'm going to repeat that again. A window is the last line of a paragraph that appears alone at the top of a new page, or in document production, a new column. So it's the last line of a paragraph that appears at the top of what? The column. The last of the paragraph that appears alone, that last line. The last line of the paragraph that appears alone at the top of what? A column. I was having a class with some of my foreign students, and one of them said, sir, there's a window. So some people in the class were like, what is he saying? The moment he said that, I knew there was a window. I said, okay, so let me show you how to do that. And we did that. So it's important because most of you will be having, I will just tell you, you have a window. And I don't expect anyone to start looking at the window. So who is there at the window? No, I'm not talking about your window, right? I'm talking about window, right? So you have a window in your document. So you have to fix it because the last line of a paragraph that appears alone at the top of a page or a column is what it is. It's a window. But when is the first line of a paragraph, or in this case, a heading? We call them subheadings. Most time, if you have a subheading on its own, right, then that becomes an often. And literally, often, right? If you know, a literal sense, often is somewhere that doesn't have maybe a parent, right? So it's left alone. So when you have the first line of a paragraph or a heading that appears alone, why the window is the last line of a paragraph that appears alone, okay? Now, the often is the first line of a paragraph or a heading that appears alone at the bottom. Window is at the top, okay? Often is at the bottom of a page or a column. I'm going to repeat this again. A window is the last line of a paragraph, okay, that appears alone at the top of a page or a column. So when you have that last line of a paragraph that is appearing at the top, right, we have that as a window. But an often is what? The first line, or usually a subhead, that appears alone at the bottom. What about bottom? We're talking about page 1 going to page 2, and it's just there on its own. When I see that, I'll tell most of you, you have an orphan. Please don't say don't say I'm saying that you are an orphan. You are not you are not an orphan, right? right? You have an orphan in your document. You have an orphan in your document. So it's not the time to say, who is the orphan? No, you have an orphan in your document. So you have to check to ensure that the first line of the paragraph or the subheading is not appearing alone at the bottom of the page or column. Okay. So even though the Microsoft Word usually applies automatic window and author controls, it's always a good practice to always check that both the window, the last of the paragraph, and the first of the paragraph have been removed. In this case, we're talking about windows and orphans have been removed. Although, when we are doing the column break, it takes off, right, this problem. It usually takes off the orphans and window, but it's a good practice to always check. Accuracy of data entry. Okay, accuracy. Now, it's important for you to read through all your work and make sure that the text or data you've been typing is 100%. Okay, ensure that your documents are consistent in all areas, not only the font or styles, but also line spacing is important. Paragraph spacing is important. These are things you have to properly check. You have to properly check. Okay, if you have inserted a page break, make sure there are no blank pages. Very important. Okay, there are no blank pages. Now, the importance of accurate data entry, right? How is it important? It's important because when you're given a word, most of the time you might be asked to type in this. It's important that you type it exactly the way it is. Type it exactly the way it is. It is very, very important. Okay, because what happens is that it can result to some errors. So let's look at some common data entry errors, spelling errors. Most of you have that spelling errors, right? Something is being typed in, let's say a book, B-O-O-K, and you type B-O-K. That's a data entry error. Errors in the use of capital letters. This is one thing I want to emphasize on. Now, in your IGCSE questions, you will see that they will type in, the first one is uppercase. Let's say, for example, going to a mountain, and the G is uppercase. Most of you will type in lowercase. That's a data entry error. Okay, practical wise, well, we won't talk about theoretical. This is practical wise. Most of the time, I've seen this in presentations. I had to overlook because we've not talked about common data entry errors. But now we've talked about it. I'm not going to overlook because we've talked. I'll be commenting on those errors. I'll be writing part of what data entry errors because it is what it is. It's a data entry error. Okay, transpose numbers. You have to look out for it. 21 is not the same thing as 12. 32 is not the same thing as 23. So let's take note of that. Okay, so this is very, very important. Verification. Now, when we talk about verification, this is a way of preventing errors when data is being copied from one medium to another. In this case, it's being copied from the source document to to your word processor or to your database or to your spreadsheet. Okay, this is very important. So you're preventing errors when data is being copied from the source documents to the database or the spreadsheet or word processor, or in this case, one medium to another. Again, please take note, verification does not stop all errors. It helps you to reduce the errors made when data is entered into the computer. And this is so because you're checking the accuracy of the data entry. So you have these data given, the source document, and when you are keying them in to the computer, you're ensuring that you're not making those mistakes. And the computer helps you to ensure that those spelling errors and everything is checked. So it does not stop all errors. This is where validation comes in. This is where validation comes in. Okay, so there are two common ways that verification checks are carried out. There are two common ways. We have the visual verification and we have the double data entry. We have visual verification and double data entry. So let's talk about the visual verification. Visual verification is when you are you're manually looking through from the source document and to ensuring that what has been entered from the source document matches what is there in the computer. This is an advice that I'm given. If the word verification is used in a question, call this method visual what? Checking. if the word is not used in the question, call it what? Visual what? Verification. Do you understand? So this simply means the visual what? You're not even, you don't want to repeat the same thing over and over again. So visual verification. Let's look at verification. Like I said, it's also called what? A visual check, right? So this is the process of checking for data entry by comparing, right? You're comparing what? Original data document, okay, with the data entered into the computer. Okay, so that's what you're doing, right? You're comparing the original document, yes, paper document, right, with data entered into the computer. So you have your source document, which could be a paper form, and you're just comparing if what you've keyed into the computer is the same thing. Okay, this does not make sure that the data is correct. They could, again, I said something in the introduction of this class that your source document could be wrong, but that does not mean that what you have keyed into the computer is also wrong. If the source document is wrong, it's not your fault. But what data verification is all about is to ensure that what has been transferred from this medium to another is identical. Hope that makes sense. Okay. Now, for example, telephone number this was recorded as this. Then this error will be copied into what? The computer. This is not the same thing as proofreading. It's not the same. Double data entry talks about this is when the data is entered into the system twice, right? You enter into the system twice by two different people, right? So this is what happens. Now, for double data entry, it is the computer that is now comparing, right? So this comparison is done by the computer to see if there's a difference between the data that has been entered by these two different sets of people. And if there's an error, it's going to flag it. And it can then be corrected by the user. So this is what went wrong, this is what went wrong. Okay, so that's why we use passwords. Type in the first password, type in the second password, and the computer is going to check if it's what? Identical. Why are validations and verification needed? Why are validations and verification needed? Now, when they are used together, it helps to reduce numbers of errors. Okay, even together, they don't stop all data errors, but it gives you a fairly amount of document or information entered the computer to be what? To a certain level of what? Correctness. Okay. Now we have an example here. Has a telephone number of this, but it's recorded as what this. This error would not be found or corrected to visual check or double entry if the most appropriate validation check is applied. Okay. For example, to make sure that the telephone number are 6 digits long and start with this or whatever, then this would go on to the validation test. So for example, if I have 6 telephone numbers and in my validation, telephone number should be 7. If I type in 6, it gives me an error. Okay, it gives me an error. So this is very, very important. Proofreading. Okay, proofreading. Proofreading is a part of proofing process, but it is not a form of verification. When we talk about proofreading, this is the careful reading and rereading. This is what? The careful reading and reading of document before it is finally printed. Before you send it to the printer, go through your work. That's what we call proofreading. Go through your work. Most of you don't go through your work. Okay, even the year 11 that did their major, they didn't go through their work. So just, I'm done, print, I'm done, print. That's a terrible way of submitting your work. If you are done, go through your work. So carefully read and reread the document to detect any errors, spelling, grammar, punctuation, or layout. Okay, whether or not they were in the original document. So this process is more than just verification, because verification is just simply checking that whatever has been there in the transcript has been transferred successfully to what? To the computer. So if the original data contains errors, then the verified data will also contain what? The same errors. But proofreading helps to remove this kind of errors, because you are now carefully reading and what? Rereading what? The document.